Intro. In the golden era of Hollywood, there was one name that defined glamour, charm, and box office dominance: Betty Grable. From her iconic pin-up photo that kept American soldiers' spirits high during the World War II, to her reign as the queen of Technicolor musicals, she was the ultimate star. But behind the dazzling smile and million-dollar legs was a life filled with ambition, sacrifices, and struggles against the changing tides of Hollywood. How did a young girl from St. Louis rise to become the highest-paid actress in America, and what led to the decline of her once unstoppable career? This is the story of Betty Grable, a legend who captivated the world but paid a heavy price for fame. Childhood and family. Betty Grable, born Elizabeth Ruth Grable on December 18, 1916, in St. Louis, Missouri, was the youngest of 3 children in a family with diverse European ancestry, including Dutch, English, German, Swiss German, and Irish roots. Her parents, Lillian Rose, née Hoffman, and John Con Grable, came from different backgrounds. Her father was a stockbroker, while her mother was a homemaker with ambitious dreams for her children, especially Betty. The Grable family was relatively well off, but their household was heavily influenced by Lillian's strong personality and determination. Tragedy struck early in Betty's life. She had 2 older siblings, Marjorie Lucille Arnold, née Grable, and John Carl Jackie Grable, but Jackie died at a young age. Losing her brother before she was even born meant Betty grew up with only Marjorie as a sibling. This loss may have contributed to her mother's intense focus on Betty's success, seeing in her daughter a way to fulfill ambitions that may have otherwise been unattainable. From an early age, Betty was under immense pressure from her mother to become a star. Lillian was a strong-willed and determined woman who believed that Hollywood was the ultimate goal for her daughter. She enrolled Betty in dance and singing lessons as early as 3 years old, ensuring that her daughter had the proper foundation for a career in entertainment. Betty attended Clara Hoffman's dance school in St. Louis, where she began training in ballet and tap dancing. She showed exceptional talent early on, and Lillian was convinced that Betty had the potential to achieve fame. To further push her daughter into the spotlight, Lillian entered Betty into numerous beauty pageants as a child, believing that beauty and talent were the keys to stardom. Betty won many of these contests, gaining local recognition, but the process was not always easy for her. Despite her success in these pageants, she suffered from a fear of crowds, which made public appearances and performances challenging for her. Additionally, she experienced episodes of somnambulism, sleepwalking, a condition that may have been exacerbated by the stress of her rigorous training and the high expectations placed upon her. By the late 1920s, Lillian had set her sights on Hollywood, believing that St. Louis was too small for the kind of future she envisioned for Betty. In 1929, when Betty was 12 years old, the Grable family took a trip to California. What was originally meant to be a vacation quickly turned into a permanent relocation. Lillian saw Hollywood as the land of opportunity and made the decisive move to stay there with Betty, leaving behind her husband, John Con Grable. This separation between Betty's parents marked a turning point in her life, as it demonstrated the extent to which her mother was willing to go to ensure Betty's success in the entertainment industry. Once in Hollywood, Betty was enrolled at the Hollywood Professional School, an institution that specialized in training young performers for careers in film and theater. It was here that she refined her skills in singing, dancing, and acting. She also formed a double act with fellow student Emlyn Peake, who would later become known as Mitzi Mayfair, a famous dancer and actress. This partnership provided Betty with early exposure to professional performance and helped her build confidence in front of an audience. Although Lillian's relentless ambition for her daughter played a significant role in shaping Betty's future, It also placed considerable pressure on her from a young age. Unlike many children who were allowed a carefree upbringing, Betty's life was structured around training, auditions, and competitions. Her mother micromanaged every aspect of her development, ensuring that she was always prepared for the next big opportunity. This rigorous upbringing made Betty disciplined and hardworking, but it also meant she had little room for personal freedom. Career building upon her early experiences in Hollywood, Betty Grable's career in the 1930s was marked by perseverance and gradual ascent within the film industry. After relocating to California in 1929, her mother Lillian was instrumental in securing her initial roles. At just 12 years old, Betty made her uncredited debut as a chorus girl in Fox Studios' Happy Days, 1929. To navigate age restrictions, Lillian misrepresented Betty's age, a tactic that, once discovered, led to Betty's dismissal from certain projects. In 1930, under the pseudonym Frances Dean, Betty joined Samuel Goldwyn's ensemble, becoming one of the original Goldwyn Girls. This troupe featured future stars like Lucille Ball and Paulette Goddard. Betty appeared in several productions, including Whoopee, 1930, where she led the opening musical number Cowboys, though she remained uncredited. By 1932, at the age of 15, Betty signed with RKO Radio Pictures, adopting her now famous stage name. She underwent rigorous training in acting, singing, and dancing. Her first credited role came with Probation, 1932. Despite this milestone, she continued to secure minor parts in films such as Cavalcade, 1933, and The Gay Divorcee, 1934, the latter featuring Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Seeking more prominent opportunities, Betty transitioned to Paramount Pictures in the mid-1930s. The studio loaned her to 20th Century Fox for the comedy Pigskin Parade, 1936, where she co-starred alongside Judy Garland. Despite the exposure, her performance was overshadowed by Garland's rising stardom. Returning to Paramount, Betty found herself cast in a series of B-movies, often portraying naive college students in films like This Way Please, 1937, and College Swing, 1938. A significant turning point occurred in 1939 when Betty starred opposite Jackie Coogan in $1 Million Legs. While the film itself was a modest B-movie, it earned her the enduring nickname associated with her famed legs. That same year, she achieved critical acclaim on Broadway in Cole Porter's musical Dewberry Was a Lady, sharing the stage with Ethel Merman and Bert Lahr. This role revitalized her career and caught the attention of 20th Century Fox executives, setting the stage for her subsequent rise to stardom in the 1940s. Betty Grable's career soared to new heights in the 1940s, marking the golden era of her time in Hollywood. In 1940, after replacing Alice Faye in Down Argentine Way, she quickly captured the attention of audiences with her radiant charm, lively performances, and captivating presence. This film became a major success and set the stage for her reign as one of Hollywood's top box office draws. From that moment on, Betty became the queen of Technicolor musicals, starring in a series of hit films that defined the decade. Her popularity skyrocketed with movies like Moon Over Miami, Springtime in the Rockies, Sweet Rosie O'Grady, and Pin-Up Girl. These films showcased her singing, dancing, and comedic timing, making her an essential part of 20th Century Fox's success. By 1942, she was not only one of Hollywood's top 10 most popular stars, but also the highest-paid woman in America, earning a staggering $300,000 per year. Between 1942 and 1951, she remained the highest-grossing female movie star, proving her dominance at the box office year after year. While her movies were drawing in millions of fans, Betty Grable's image off screen became just as legendary. In 1943, a single photograph turned her into an enduring cultural icon. Photographer Frank Powolny captured an image of Betty in a white one-piece swimsuit, looking over her shoulder with a playful smile and one leg bent. The photo became the most famous pin-up image of World War II, with over 5 million copies distributed to U.S. soldiers overseas. It was so beloved that it became a symbol of morale during wartime, with servicemen carrying her picture in their pockets and even painting her likeness on aircraft. Betty's appeal was more than just beauty. She embodied hope, optimism, and the spirit of the era. As the war ended, Betty continued to dominate Hollywood. In 1947, she starred alongside Dan Dailey in Mother Wore Tights, one of her most successful films. This heartwarming musical cemented her place as 20th Century Fox's top female star and further solidified her reputation as a reliable box office sensation. Throughout the late 1940s, she starred in a string of hit films, including That Lady in Ermine, When My Baby Smiles at Me, My Blue Heaven, and Wabash Avenue. Her earnings and popularity remained unmatched, and her influence in Hollywood was so great that she had her legs insured for $1 million, a publicity stunt that added to her mystique. As the 1950s dawned, Hollywood underwent a significant transformation, and the kind of Technicolor musicals and light-hearted comedies that had defined Betty Grable's career were beginning to fall out of favor. Audiences, now exposed to grittier dramas, method acting, and more provocative storytelling, were moving away from the formulaic musicals that had been immensely popular during the war and immediate post-war years. The rise of television also meant that people could enjoy entertainment from the comfort of their homes, making them more selective about which films they chose to see in theaters. At the same time, a new wave of young glamorous actresses was emerging, led by the sultry and enigmatic Marilyn Monroe. Unlike Betty, who had been the epitome of the wholesome all-American girl, Monroe embodied a more overtly sensual and modern persona, capturing the attention of both audiences and studio executives. As Monroe's popularity skyrocketed, 20th Century Fox shifted its focus to her, promoting her as the next big blonde bombshell. This put Betty in a difficult position, as she was no longer the studio's most prized leading lady. Despite these challenges, Betty still had a few successful films in the early 1950s. Movies like Meet Me After the Show, 1951, and The Farmer Takes a Wife, 1953, demonstrated that she could still draw audiences, but it was becoming clear that her box office dominance was fading. The industry was evolving, and Betty, who had been one of the highest-paid actresses of the previous decade, was no longer the primary focus of Hollywood executives. A major turning point came in 1953 when Betty starred in How to Marry a Millionaire alongside Marilyn Monroe and Lauren Bacall. The film was a huge success, becoming one of the year's highest-grossing movies. However, it also symbolized a changing of the guard in Hollywood. While Betty had top billing in the film's promotional materials, it was Monroe who stole the spotlight, both on screen and in the media. Audiences and critics were captivated by Monroe's comedic charm and undeniable sex appeal, signaling that she was now Fox's biggest asset. Betty, recognizing that the industry was moving in a new direction, made a pivotal decision. After years of being one of Fox's most bankable stars, she chose not to renew her contract with the studio, effectively ending her long-standing relationship with the company that had made her a household name. At the time, this was a bold move. Leaving the security of a major studio contract meant stepping into an uncertain future. Betty hoped that by doing so, she could reinvent herself outside of Hollywood, possibly making a transition to Broadway or live performances, where she had always felt comfortable. However, this transition did not go as smoothly as she had hoped. While she had previously achieved success on stage in Dewberry Was a Lady, 1939, the 1950s Broadway scene was far more competitive. The roles that might have suited her were now being offered to younger actresses, and without the backing of a major studio, securing prominent roles became increasingly difficult. As a result, Betty was soon facing financial difficulties, a stark contrast to the days when she had been the highest-paid woman in Hollywood. Realizing that she still needed to work, she returned to film for one last major role in How to Be Very, Very Popular, 1955. The movie was intended as a light-hearted comedy, with Betty starring alongside Cherie North, an actress who Fox was grooming to be their next big blonde star. However, the film failed to resonate with the audiences, and it became clear that Betty's era as a leading Hollywood actress had come to an end. As Betty Grable moved into the 1960s, she transitioned away from Hollywood films and focused on live performances and television appearances. While her dominance at the box office had waned by the mid-1950s, she remained a beloved entertainer and found new opportunities in theater and variety shows. Her ability to adapt to changing entertainment trends allowed her to stay in the public eye, even as a new generation of stars took over Hollywood. By this time, Las Vegas had become a major hub for live performances, attracting stars from the golden age of Hollywood who were looking to extend their careers beyond the silver screen. Betty embraced this new stage in her career and became a popular act in the city's nightclub scene. She performed in Las Vegas cabaret shows, drawing audiences who still adored her charm, singing, and dance performances. Unlike film, where she was constrained by studio contracts and scripts, live performances allowed her to connect directly with her fans, bringing an energy and spontaneity that wasn't always possible in the highly controlled environment of Hollywood filmmaking. At the same time, she made several appearances on television variety shows, which were a major form of entertainment during the 1960s. She was a guest star on The Jack Benny Show and The Lucy and Deezy Comedy Hour, both of which were highly popular and gave her a chance to showcase her comedic timing and natural charisma. Her guest appearances reminded audiences of her star power and proved that she was still a household name, even if she was no longer at the center of Hollywood's film industry. One of the most significant highlights of her later career came in 1962, when she took on the role of Miss Adelaide in a Las Vegas production of Guys and Dolls. The role was a perfect fit for Betty. Miss Adelaide is a comedic yet endearing character, much like the roles Betty had played during her film career. Her performance was well received, and it demonstrated that her talents extended far beyond the silver screen. The show allowed her to fully embrace her stage presence and showcased her ability to hold an audience's attention in a live setting. Building on the success of her stage performances, Betty took on one of the most iconic roles of her career in 1967, when she starred in a touring production of Hello, Dolly. The musical had been a massive Broadway hit, and having Betty in the lead role added extra star power to the production. Her portrayal of Dolly Levi, a charismatic and witty matchmaker, was a testament to her comedic timing and stage presence. Touring with Hello, Dolly gave her a chance to reach audiences across the country, proving that even as Hollywood moved on to new stars, Betty Grable still had the ability to captivate audiences. As the 1970s began, Betty continued to work, though her appearances became less frequent. Her final major acting role came in 1973 when she starred in a stage production of Born Yesterday at the Alhambra Theater in Jacksonville, Florida. The role of Billie Dawn, a seemingly ditzy yet sharp-witted woman, aligned well with Betty's signature style, charming, funny, and full of life. While she was no longer the box office sensation she had been in the 1940s, this final stage role was a fitting way to close out her decades-long career. Despite Betty Grable's reputation as Hollywood's golden girl, her personal and professional life was not without challenges. Though she reigned as one of Hollywood's top box office draws throughout the 1940s, her career was shaped, often constrained, by the strict control of the studio system. Like many actors of the era, she was bound by an ironclad contract with 20th Century Fox, which dictated not only the films she appeared in, but also how she presented herself to the public. Every aspect of her image, from her wardrobe choices to her romantic life, was carefully managed to fit the wholesome, glamorous persona that the studio had built around her. However, by the early 1950s, as she grew older and more established, Betty began to push back against these rigid controls. A major turning point came when Betty refused to be loaned out to Columbia Pictures for the film The Pleasure Is All Mine. At the time, it was common practice for studios to lend their contracted actors to rival studios, often without their input. Betty, who had spent over a decade playing similar roles in musicals and romantic comedies, was growing frustrated with being typecast. She had hoped to explore more diverse opportunities, possibly even transitioning into dramatic roles, but Fox insisted on keeping her in the same formulaic films that had made her famous. When she refused the Columbia project, it was seen as defiance against the studio system, which valued compliance over creative independence. Her refusal resulted in a temporary suspension from Fox, a harsh punishment that underscored how little power even the most successful actors had against the studios. Though she was eventually reinstated, the conflict damaged her relationship with the executives at Fox, who had already begun looking for younger talent to carry the studio into the next decade. By the early 1950s, Marilyn Monroe was rising as the next big blonde bombshell, and the studio was eager to capitalize on her appeal. Betty, who was now in her late 30s, was slowly being phased out despite still being one of the highest-grossing female stars in Hollywood. In 1953, after filming How to Marry a Millionaire with Marilyn Monroe and Lauren Bacall, Betty made a bold decision not to renew her contract with 20th Century Fox. This effectively ended her long-standing relationship with the studio that had made her a superstar. Though she had been one of the most bankable stars of the previous decade, she recognized that Hollywood was changing and that she was no longer Fox's top priority. Instead of continuing to fight for roles she no longer found fulfilling, she chose to walk away. Her departure from Fox marked a gradual decline in her film career. Without the backing of a major studio, securing leading roles became more difficult. Betty had hoped to pursue more stage work and reinvent herself outside of film, but the transition was not easy. Hollywood had always been harsh toward aging actresses, and with Monroe and other younger stars dominating the industry, Betty found fewer opportunities than she had anticipated. Despite the setbacks, she remained a beloved and respected figure in the entertainment world. Though she never publicly criticized Fox, it was clear that she had grown disillusioned with the way the studio had handled her career. Her experience reflected a larger struggle that many actors faced as the studio system began to decline in the 1950s. As Hollywood moved toward a more independent model, actors began gaining more control over their projects. But for stars like Betty, who had been shaped by the old system, the shift came too late to fully benefit from it. Despite the challenges she faced, both professionally and personally, Betty Grable's legacy endured far beyond her struggles. She remained one of Hollywood's most cherished icons, a symbol of wartime optimism, beauty, and talent. Her decision to walk away from Fox may have ended her reign as a top film star, but it also cemented her status as a woman who refused to be controlled by the industry that had once defined her. Even as Hollywood moved on to newer stars, Betty's influence remained timeless, her impact forever etched in the golden age of cinema. Marriage. Betty Grable's personal life, though seemingly glamorous, was marked by heartbreak, challenges, and personal struggles. Her first marriage was to Jackie Coogan, a former child star best known for his role in The Kid, 1921, alongside Charlie Chaplin. When Betty and Jackie married in 1937, he was struggling with the fallout of a legal battle against his parents, who had mismanaged his childhood earnings and left him nearly penniless. The stress from this highly publicized lawsuit, combined with the fact that Jackie's career was declining while Betty's was just beginning to take off, created a divide between them. Though they had shared affection in the early days, the pressures of Hollywood and financial instability took their toll. After just 2 years together, they divorced in 1939, with Betty walking away from the marriage relatively unscathed, though she later admitted that it had been a learning experience about love and relationships in the entertainment industry. Betty's second marriage to bandleader Harry James was far more significant, lasting over 2 decades and producing her 2 beloved daughters, Victoria and Jessica. At first, the union seemed like a Hollywood fairy tale. The successful actress and the famous musician, both adored by the public, starting a life together. They married in 1943 at the peak of Betty's career, and soon after, she shifted much of her focus to family life while balancing her stardom. However, behind the scenes, their relationship was far from perfect. Harry James had a well-documented struggle with alcohol and gambling, and his lifestyle soon began to strain their marriage. Despite Betty's efforts to maintain their relationship, James's heavy drinking often led to reckless behavior, and his reputation as a womanizer only fueled further tension between them. Rumors of his affairs circulated for years, and while Betty did her best to ignore or dismiss them publicly, it became increasingly difficult to maintain the image of a happy home. Some reports suggested that Betty herself began drinking more heavily during this period, possibly as a way to cope with the ongoing turmoil. Despite their marital troubles, Betty and Harry stayed together for more than 20 years, longer than many Hollywood marriages of the time. Betty was deeply committed to keeping their family intact, and for a long time, she tolerated James's indiscretions, prioritizing her daughter's well-being. However, by the early 1960s, their relationship had deteriorated beyond repair. His excessive gambling, drinking, and infidelity had reached a breaking point, and in 1965, they finalized their divorce. The end of their marriage was a difficult chapter in Betty's life, but she handled it with her characteristic dignity, refusing to speak badly about her ex-husband in public. After her tumultuous marriage to Harry James ended in 1965, Betty Grable found herself at a crossroads. She had spent more than 2 decades in a relationship filled with infidelity, financial struggles, and emotional ups and downs. Though she had built a legendary career, her personal life had been far from stable. Following her divorce, Betty largely retreated from the Hollywood spotlight, shifting her focus to stage performances, television appearances, and a quieter life away from the chaos of the film industry. It was during this period that she found companionship and comfort in Bob Remick, a much younger dancer who became her steady partner in the final years of her life. Unlike her previous relationships, which had been highly publicized and often tumultuous, her time with Bob was remarkably peaceful and private. They never married, but their deep emotional bond provided Betty with the kind of stability she had never experienced in her past relationships. Bob Remick was 27 years younger than Betty, but their age difference did not seem to matter. While Hollywood had always celebrated Betty as the ultimate blonde bombshell, Bob saw her as more than just a screen icon. He saw the woman behind the glamour, someone who had spent years enduring the pressures of fame and the demands of the entertainment industry. By the time they became involved, Betty was no longer chasing movie roles or Hollywood accolades. She was looking for companionship, trust, and a sense of normalcy, and Bob provided just that. Unlike her marriage to Harry James, which had been plagued by his heavy drinking, gambling, and extramarital affairs, Betty's relationship with Bob was free from scandal. There were no tabloid headlines, no rumors of infidelity, and no financial disputes. Instead, they enjoyed a quiet, simple life together, spending time away from the public eye. The two were often seen together at social gatherings among close friends, and Bob accompanied Betty to Las Vegas, where she continued performing in live stage productions. Death. By the early 1970s, Betty Grable's once glamorous life had taken a difficult turn. After decades in the spotlight, she had largely retreated from Hollywood, focusing instead on stage performances and live appearances. Though she was no longer a major film star, she remained a beloved entertainer and continued to work as much as she could. However, behind the scenes, her health had been quietly deteriorating. Years of smoking, a habit she had picked up during her Hollywood years, were beginning to take their toll. In 1972, Betty received devastating news. She had been diagnosed with lung cancer. The disease had already progressed significantly by the time it was detected, leaving her with few treatment options. Adding to her struggles, she lacked proper health insurance, a common issue for many aging Hollywood stars of her era. Despite having been one of the highest-paid women in America during her prime, medical costs were now a heavy burden. Determined not to let her illness define her, Betty continued working for as long as she could. Even as her strength waned, she made appearances and performed whenever possible, using her earnings to cover her growing medical expenses. But as the months passed, her condition worsened. She was frequently hospitalized at St. John's Hospital in Los Angeles, where she received ongoing treatment. Friends and loved ones, including her longtime companion Bob Remick, stayed by her side, offering support during her final months. Despite the care she received, the cancer was aggressive. By mid-1973, Betty had grown too weak to continue performing, and she spent most of her time in the hospital. Her once vibrant, energetic spirit was now confined to a hospital bed, and the reality of her situation became painfully clear to those around her. She passed away on July 2, 1973, at the age of 56, leaving behind a legacy that would endure far beyond her years. Her funeral, held just 2 days later, was attended by family, friends, and colleagues from Hollywood's golden age. Many of her fellow entertainers, including those who had worked with her at 20th Century Fox, came to pay their respects. Though she had been out of the public eye for some time, the impact of her passing was deeply felt, as she had been an icon for an entire generation. After her cremation, her ashes were interred at Inglewood Park Cemetery in Los Angeles, where she was laid to rest among other Hollywood legends. Though her life had been cut short, her legacy as a star, a pin-up icon, and a beloved entertainer remained intact. Even in death, Betty Grable continued to be celebrated for the joy, beauty, and optimism she had brought to millions of fans around the world.